Hello everyone, today's video is a response to a request somebody was asking about using a quick little video for the CRJ that is made by Aerosoft and give you a quick little demonstration on how to land it. Unfortunately, I reached out to the good folks over at Aerosoft and they never answered back to me as far as being able to arrange for some kind of, borrowing the airplane just for the purposes of video, which is kind of a bummer, but it happens. The good news is we do have this great Cessna Citation Longitude, which is a really good airplane. It is not the same thing as a regional jet in so many different ways, but it does have a couple of neat properties that are actually fairly similar. One, of course, being the fact that our engines are mounted over the tail, or actually I should say near the tail, not on the wing. The second thing is it has this kind of long body to it with kind of tricky little visibility hanging on the nose here. That's actually going to work to our favor. The one thing we need to think about is when we're dealing with an engine that's chilling by the tail here is when you add power, it causes the nose to go down. When you remove power, it causes the nose to go up. Now, with that not in mind, when we're making our approach to our landing, which is our lovely old runway tree at Bradley International Airport here, we need to remember if we reduce power, the nose is going to tend to lift up on us. Now, that's just an interesting quirk of these types of aircraft, even though they do cant the motors in such a way that it reduces that effect. So let's go ahead and unpause, and I'll make our way down. All right, so first things first, I'm going to be interested in getting on my approach speed. This particular aircraft allows you to drop the flaps and the landing gear at a pretty high speed, so I'm going to go ahead and start this plane slowing down immediately. Now, if you're a very, very heavy version of this plane, obviously we need to get that going as fast as possible, otherwise we're going to run out of room. I'm going to go ahead and pop out my second notch of flaps. I'm taking a look at the precision approach indicator on the side of the runway there. I'm noticing all 4 white lights are on. I'm just going to bring my nose down a little bit here. Give us just a few moments. We'll go ahead and pop that last notch of flaps down. This aircraft slows down very quickly when you put that last notch of flaps down. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for just a second here. Now, how do we know what speed we need to go? Well, first of all, you're supposed to know the airspeed, the weight of the aircraft, and be able to know exactly what the speed is. One of the neat things about this aircraft, which is probably different than the regional jet, is a lot of times you'll actually have speed bugs that allow you to do things like approach speed. So for me, I can see my approach speed is supposed to be 150 knots. So if I can actually follow the speed all the way in the ground, I'm good, right? It's a little more complicated than that. The other thing you have to think about is your angle of attack. Now, this aircraft and many aircraft like it have an angle of attack meter. Basically, this is telling you how much of a chunk of the air the wing is currently taken out. Now, the nice thing about this thing is it has this little red zone, which basically says, hey, you're going to stall the plane if you go that slow. And you also have this long white arc. Ideally, we're going to be somewhere between this halfway point here and the red zone. The closer to the red zone we get, the more likely our nose is going to be up very steep, but we're going to have a very short landing run. If we get too close to this one, we're going to be coming down to the ground so darn fast that if we ever do make contact with the ground, we're probably going to end up floating the whole way down. Now, the next thing I want to take a look at, too, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is my seating position with this airplane. Whatever position you choose to sit in, you want to work from that position just to keep your frame of reference logical. If I want to sit up here like I would in the actual plane, actually a great way to check that is where the headrest is. My head would actually be right here in the real plane. You need to make sure you keep your head in this position. Of course, I've been flying a lot of bigger planes recently, so my default position's a little off. One thing I always like to keep an eye on is my airspeed as well as my altitude. And if you can, of course, and stick your head down a little bit, we always like to take a look at the angle of attack as well. So let's go ahead and unpause and I'll continue our approach here. So my flaps are now down, my special landing gear are all set. We have our speed brakes armed. I'm taking a look at the end of the runway. I'm noticing I'm a little on the high side. Now here's where this gets interesting. When you work with jets, use the throttle to control your rate of descent. I know we've seen this before, but it's one of those skills that takes quite a bit of practice to get the hang of. Like I notice I'm starting to sink, I'm going to simply push the throttle forward and keep my nose in the same position relative to the horizon. Now as soon as I do that, you'll notice my vertical speed came right out. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce throttle a little bit more. I'll let the nose come down so we can get a little bit closer. You can see we have a pretty substantial amount of turbulence here. There we go. 2 red, 2 white. That looks pretty good. And I can feel we're getting a little sinky here, but that's not too bad. Should be about 750 feet per minute. I'm about 650, which means I'm starting to gain altitude. I'm starting to feel that turbulence a little bit. Now, aircraft that are on the smaller side, you have the ability to coast down to a landing. Aircraft that are on the bigger side, you basically have to keep the power in. So here's what I like to do. I come right over the numbers, and I start pulling the throttle back. Throttle gets back, and what we're going to do is let the plane sink. Then we're going to lift up the nose and wait for the back 2 tires to make contact. Now, if you go a little wide like I just did there, that's okay. That just means that our initial approach point was a little bit higher than it needed to be. But the important thing is notice how it was a very, very controlled approach all the way down onto the ground, and it was actually a relatively smooth landing. Now, if you're flying something like a regional jet, keep in mind you're going to be higher up off the ground, which means your whole perspective is going to be more like this than it is going to be like this. So hopefully that video helps you out. Again, like I said, just answering that little response here. That was a pretty okay landing. I would have preferred to get a little bit closer to the numbers, but I find in flight sim, the plane tends to drop out on you if you pull the power out completely and try to coast it, even though you end up with a shorter runway run. Enjoy.